everybody. Welcome to our series on making decisions under duress. I'm Dr. Lisa Lang. I'm a TOC-ICO certified expert and the chief TOC expert here at Science of Business. Some people call me the job shop whisperer. I am the head coach for our Velocity Scheduling System coaching program. Presenting today, we've got Brad Stallon. He is a TOC-ICO certified expert. He's also a certified exit planner. He is our TOC pricing expert, and he is the job shop pricing coach, one of our two coaches, along with our main presenter today, who is Bo Gannis. Bo is the Throughput Accounting guru. He is a CPA and certified management accountant and a recovering cost accountant. While in public accounting, Bo specialized in the application of cost accounting to small and medium-sized manufacturers. Bo has also served as the controller of a specialized steel products manufacturer developing mine-resistant armor-protected vehicles and other heavy steel products, and will be sharing his experiences along the way in today's session. So with that, I hand it over to Brad and Bo.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lisa. All right, well, today, I'll go back up real quick. You saw the picture of the frogs in the boiling pot of water here. Well, one of the keys we want you to walk away from is realizing when to act. And so we want to provoke you to evaluate the need to act sooner versus later in your business to make the best of what you're faced with. Now, this can take different forms. It may mean producing a meager profit. It may mean striving to break even. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. It may also mean evaluating options related to terminating the business or exiting the business. As we say here, today we want to focus on ensuring that you have alignment in your business between the level of throughput margin you're able to generate and the operating expense you maintain so that you make decisions when appropriate, not before it's too late.
So one of the things that Dr. Goldratt told people in the TOC community, that it was important not to let the important become urgent. So that's what we're speaking about now. If it's appropriate to be the frog that jumps out of the pot, let's jump.
Right. So what we're going to do, we're going to walk through the TOC buy-in process. Now, we're not going to teach you the buy-in process here, but it is the framework by which we have made today's session. And the first step in that process is to agree on the objective. So what are we actually trying to do here? Well, we verbalized it as this: to remain solvent and survive until such time that economic conditions stabilize. Now, that doesn't mean that economic conditions return to the boom time levels that we have experienced previously. It means that it stabilizes and we have a level of certainty about what's coming. It may not be pretty, and there may still be a higher level than normal of uncertainty, but at least we have some visibility into what's coming at us, and we can get a sense of where we're at in the business.
So normally, Bo, we would say the objective is almost always to make money or more money now as well as in the future.
Right.
And while that's still true, a more specific objective is the one that's verbalized here.
Yes. So that takes us to the next step, which is agree on the problem. Now, why would you want to agree on the problem? Why not just jump to the solutions, Brad? Well, if we don't understand the problem that we're up against, we're going to formulate solutions that may not appropriately or completely address the problem. And so it's important to follow the process and land on what are we actually confronted with here as the real problem. Now, here will be our verbalization of the situation. The throughput margin we expect to generate is insufficient to cover our operating expenses. Said differently, the money we're bringing in is not enough to cover the money that has to go out. So money in is throughput margin, money out is operating expense. Number two, we can only generate a reduced amount of throughput relative to pre-pandemic levels.
And the reason that we have throughput in blue versus throughput margin in green is that throughput margin in green represents flow of money, and the throughput represents the flow of goods, a physical throughput. And they're different. You could have physical throughput and attached to that is money. But when you think about physical flow of goods, materials, people, whatever, then that's conceptually different than the amount of money that's attached to it.
Right. So you may be able to flow dollars independently of what's actually flowing through your shop, is what that is getting at. Number 3 there is sources of new throughput margin take some time, more than what we have, to get into place. So sure, we could get a new customer, go to a new market segment. That might take 3 to 6 months to a year. That's time we don't have right now. Number 4, the cash flow we expect to generate is negative and may consume and potentially exceed any financial buffers that we have, those being cash reserves, debt financing, or other funding sources, say owner funding from their personal reserves. Number 5, many operating expenses are necessary for continuing operations. So operating expenses, as we all know, are sticky. We can't just get rid of them proportionately to our level of business. Many of those things, like the building or your utilities, certain extent your workforce, we're going to have these costs regardless of how much is flowing and how much is coming through the shop.
So by agreeing on the problem, what we're trying to do is provide you an overview of the kind of problems you might be dealing with right now if you're financially stressed. But you specifically might have several that are different than these 5. This is kind of an overview of what we see as the problem of the financial stress that businesses are going through right now.
Right. So the next step, once we've agreed on the problem, is to agree on the criteria for a good solution. Well, again, why not just jump straight to the solution? Come on, Brad. Come on, Bo. You guys are just taking forever. You're drawing this out. Well, typically what happens in a conversation is I have a beautiful idea, and I tell it to Brad, and Brad goes, well, that's good, but here are the 7 problems with it, Bo. My idea, however, is even better than your idea. Brad tells it to me, and I go, well, here are the 17 problems with your idea, Brad. And so what ends up happening is you can go round and round in your conversation, but never actually land again on what the actual solution should be. Why? Because we don't even know what we're looking for. And that's what the agree on criteria for a good solution really means. What does good look like? How would you describe it? And so what we came up with and how we've verbalized our criteria for a good solution would be, number 1, the business survives. And that may take the form of, we identify the operating expenses that we need to reduce in order to survive. Or we, as in 1B, we identify the operating expenses we need to defer in order to survive. 2, we retain as many of our good key employees as possible. And 3, ownership is able to preserve and protect personal assets as best they can. So this is what good will look like. Whatever solution we ultimately end up selecting, it would need to meet these 3 criteria, okay?
And we're explicitly not talking about the business going bankrupt or you running out of money. We're still talking about a survival mode.
Right, and that really becomes, or goes back to that agree on the objective, to remain solvent and survive. Now, if in so doing this process, we came to the conclusion that this just really isn't a good possibility, that may mean our objective changes and we go through we walk through a new process here, but we are contemplating this being our ultimate end objective. So once we set the criteria for a good solution, the next step would be to agree on the direction of the solution. And as a general matter of practice, Brad and I both like to establish, generally speaking, about 3 different directions that we might go in. Now, generally 2 of those are extremes, and then we like to find something kind of in the middle that isn't quite so extreme, but makes some more sense to us, if you will. But we use those extremes to set the logical boundaries of the space that we might operate in. So, as an extreme, number 1, we might not really do anything different. We may keep all the same expenses, but we may fund those expenses via debt financing, via owner financing. But that's an extreme because it really hasn't materially improved the condition of the company. And at the same time, if we were to wind up, terminating, exiting, or filing for bankruptcy in the business, it may make things worse. But nonetheless, it is an option. We might consider that one of the logical extremes, but it is an option nonetheless.
In many of the cases, when we have a new job shop pricing client, the owner has been funding the business for some period of time. The business has negative cash flow, they have personal reserves, and they're spending those reserves and actually just digging a deeper hole. So one of the reasons why this is less attractive to us is that, if you're the frog in the pot, jump, let's start taking actions. Let's just not dig a deeper hole.
Right. And I've told folks in the past, you only get to shoot the bullet one time. You're only going to get one line of credit. You're only going to get this amount of debt. You only have this amount of AR, cash, and inventory to draw upon. And so if you're drawing upon those resources and throwing good after bad, meaning you're still losing money and haven't fundamentally changed what's happening in the business, like Brad said, you're just digging a deeper hole for yourself. So that was the first direction that we might go in. The second is to reduce expenses. Now, how might we do that? Well, we could reduce the daily hours that folks are working, or we could also reduce the hours per shift. We could reduce the days of operation. So instead of working 5 days a week, maybe we work 4 10s or 3 12s, something like that. We're not advocating this, but we've heard that this is going on in certain places, and that may be that you request employees volunteer their time. Now, like I said, we've heard that's happening. I don't know if that's legal or why, and we're not recommending it, but just to present the option that's out there, perhaps. Number 4 would be reduce salaries and wages. So we just have a pay cut. And that's not, fun to contemplate perhaps, but it may be an option that we're forced to consider. We may also reduce benefits. So it may be that paid time off, vacation benefits, 401k, matching, health insurance, any number of benefits may dry up and go away during this time.
So this is the more reasonable of the two extremes, the reduce expenses. One variation on this that we've heard of is that people are going to 2 shifts that might normally run 1 shift so that they can respect the social distancing, but still have as much capacity, albeit with more hours in a day, but retain the same number of people and just running more hours of the day with half shift here and a half shift there.
Right. And and we'll get into that, but there's a host of things that come from that we can discuss here. Third is to eliminate expenses. So how might we do that? Well, let's say we had a cash reserve for today, and instead of jeopardizing our long-term financial health, it may make sense to buy some folks out with buyout packages or early retirement. So it may be that we do that for certain more experienced, higher cost employees and bring on replacements or cross-train people to fill those roles in at a reduced cost. 2, we might convert employees to contractors. So this might be an option for your sales team or your engineering team. And again, this all depends on what state you're in, the nature of the workforce that you have, any number of things. But just to present the option to you, this may exist for you in your particular situation. Third, you might outsource, automate, or eliminate certain positions in operations and functions. Fourth, you might consider eliminating positions and then cross-training to fill the gaps. Now, 3 and 4 obviously depend on a lot of different things. You may not just be able to eliminate positions easily. It may trigger severance. It may have implications, and obviously would, for your unemployment insurance. If you have a union, that obviously throws different things into the mix than if you were not unionized. And the fourth, when I was in public accounting, we had a boat manufacturer, and desperate times call for desperate measures. In the financial crisis, demand for luxury boats dried up. And so they actually had their controller out on the shop floor making components for boats. And so I know that's an extreme, but nonetheless, an option.
So I think when we talk about the frog in the pot that doesn't jump, this is, I think, where a lot of owners would agonize. they really don't want to let people go. They have, relationships with their employees. They're trying to create a secure and safe working environment. But at some point, the continuing expense for, let's say, salaried employees might cause them to go out of business because they run out of cash. So this is the one that we really have to look at. Do you need to take actions to reduce expense or not?
Right. And as painful as some of these options may be, if let's say you've got a team of 20 to 30 folks, it may be better to have, 12 to 15 folks that are able to keep a job versus everybody losing their job and you as the owner losing everything you have as well with it. So, it's worthy of consideration for sure. Okay, so that's the direction of the solution. Now, ultimately, at this point in the buy-in process, we would land on one of these directions of the solution to go with. Now, it might be one of these explicitly. It may be some combination of these. It may be something that we didn't list here, okay? But ultimately, you kind of got to decide which direction you're going to go in. Now, the fourth option that's not presented here, but as another extreme, let's say, is do nothing. You could just be like the ostrich, stick your head in the sand, or like the frog up front, just kind of enjoy the warm water until it gets too hot. But again, that's an extreme. We're here contemplating how do we survive, how do we navigate this, and how do we kind of maintain where we're at to get through this. And so that would lead us more to options 2 and 3 at some level. Now, anything we decide to do, it doesn't matter how great of a direction of the solution it is, will ultimately bring with it some negative effects. And we can predict those and develop objectives to overcome them. Now, a favorite line of politicians is, well, these were unintended consequences. No, that's not true. Brad and I don't have the viewpoint that there are unintended consequences. What it is negligence, malpractice, and lack of thinking things through fully. It leads to these, what would have otherwise been able to be seen, predicted negative effects. Yet we chose as politicians to ignore them, overlook them, or not even think about them. Looking at some of the negative effects that may come out of a decision. Well, employees might quit if you reduce the amount they make. Some of them may say, hey, I got enough saved up. I don't care. It's not worth making less for all the stress and headache. I'm going to the house and I'm going to go fishing. Fine. That may be what happens. That's a negative effect that could occur. Competitors may hire employees from you that do not like these bad policies. So if you're reducing pay and cutting hours and your competitor's not, they may jump ship. So we need to have a plan in place to ensure that employees do not quit. That would be the objective, to trim these negative effects. Looking at the second one, employees may subvert and sabotage jobs, products, and services. I'm sure no one's ever had a disgruntled employee, especially when you reduce their pay. Employees may slow down performance, and you may have attendance issues that arise. So what do we need? Well, we need a way to monitor performance to identify problems, ideally to detect them, prevent them, and then mitigate them when they arise. Third, employees you retain, and this is an unusual one, may be unhappy if they had expected to draw unemployment, which pays more than wages. Now, this was what a politician might call a unintended consequence. What do we say? Well, if you're paying people more for staying home than for working, this is a predicted negative effect, and here it is, okay? So, just like this slide, we have the picture here. This is the miracle on the Hudson. The pilot could have just flown out to sea, landed in the Hudson as they did, or attempted to go back to the airport. No matter which option this pilot selected, there were negative effects that were going to come from it. And it's not to say that we're going to live in a perfect world, but it's how do we think through and overcome those negative effects with whatever decision that we're making, okay? Now, Once we've trimmed the negative effects, that brings us to agree on the objectives to overcome implementation obstacles. And the distinction here between a predicted negative effect and the objective to overcome it, and the objective to overcome an implementation obstacle, is that an implementation obstacle exists and it's not necessarily a negative effect of our decision. It's just there already, and it's separate and apart from those negative effects. So, number one, we have determined that our actions are legal or acceptable to us from a risk perspective. Now, that doesn't mean illegal, but what it does mean, as we all know, certain decisions and actions may be in a level of gray area. Maybe there's not guidance on how to do some of this just yet from a new program that the government's doing. Whatever it may be, you may have to accept some level of risk in what you're doing. Two, we have structured the changes to maximize throughput margin while at the same time minimizing operating expense to the extent possible. Three, we have identified the employees that will be affected and in what ways they will be affected. Four, we have determined a date for implementation. And five, we have a communication plan for what, when, and how we communicate these changes to our employees.
So on the first one, an example would be having an independent contractor, particularly when an employee is converted to be an independent contractor. That there's a test, which is a preponderance test, which is subject to interpretation. So you could do it and then later under audit have somebody tell you that no, they're still an employee. So there's certain actions you need to take to protect yourself, but you would never eliminate any risk.
Now, in so doing these changes and thinking this through, we would always want to ground this back into the financial impact and the cash flow for evaluating what's going to be happening and will this actually help us achieve our objective of surviving. And so to do that, we'd recommend that you check out our cash management for job shops webinar, and that can be found at www.jobshoppricing.com/cash. And so there we walk you through how to translate these actions that you're taking here into the financial projections and then convert those financial projections into cash flow projections so you can see where you're going to be in the next coming weeks. So this has been our session for today. Now, what we would say is this: talk to us before it's too late. And I say this as a former practicing public accountant. What would happen? The client would call and say, "Hi, Bo, we just did X, Y, or Z." And as an accountant, you get that call and you go, "Good grief." And it just starts that feeling of dread sets in. You're like, okay, please tell me you didn't do this. And then they go, what does this mean for my tax return? What does this mean for my audit? And you just kind of have to grit your teeth and go, well, had you called me before you did this, I could have saved you $150,000 in tax expense for about $150 on the phone call. But now you owe the government $150,000. So not a lot I can do for you. Or in terms of the audit, it would oftentimes mean, well, because you did it that way, you're probably going to blow your bank covenants. And now we all have to have a conversation with the bank to keep them happy so they don't pull your loan. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's why we say talk to us now, earlier, before it's too late. So if you'd like help applying the concepts from this webinar to your shop, we are offering a free, confidential, no obligation financial health and cash management checkup. We're going to send you the Excel file that we use to assess your financial situation. Now, during the checkup, what are we going to do? We're going to review your financial projections and discuss potential scenarios that may be coming at you and think that through with you. We're going to review your balance sheet for potential sources of cash. And that can oftentimes be very eye-opening to folks because they don't tend to view their accounts receivable, their inventory, and their prepaids all as sources of potential cash. And so that's really using that balance sheet as a tool to manage your cash flow. Third, we're going to evaluate the sources of cash that are available to you. So do you have a line of credit? Do you have a factoring arrangement? Does the owner have personal funding available to them? What's out there and how do we think about structuring that for the needs of the business. So if you're interested in that, we'd recommend that you go to www.jobshoppricing.com/checkup to request a checkup. So thank you for your time. We appreciate you being here, and we have a few more of these coming down the pipeline, and so we'll look forward to seeing you during our next session for making decisions under duress.